in a way, maybe things got started because I started going to hear orchestra concerts from a very young age, from like I don't know 7 or something like that, 6 or 7. My parents had a subscription to the L.A. Philharmonic. I grew up in Southern California, and every Friday night I would go to hear the L.A. Phil play, um, and I think I was thrilled by it, and in one case terrified by it. But uh, so I learned, lots of orchestral rep, and that really excited me from a fairly early age. That's why I always kept that interest. And starting when I was 12 or 13, I started studying with a very interesting lady by the name of Joanna Graudon, Graudan. She was a very good pianist, but a very good teacher. But more to the point, she was, first of all, a student of Arthur Schnabel. And second of all, she was married to Nikolai Graudon, who was a cellist, who was the principal cello under Furtwängler in Berlin before they had to leave because of the Nazis. And then he was principal in Minneapolis and so on, and they played concerts together. And so she knew Furtwängler and she knew Bruno Walter and Metropolis, and she told me about them from a young age, especially Furtwängler. And and that, of course, was a revelation, uh, to learn about this the ideas and the interpretation of some of these great conductors. And she also introduced me, in a sense, to Bruckner, uh, and she also introduced me really to the world of Schubert, which I will discuss more when I give my Schubert lecture. But she, in order, when she studied with Schnabel, she didn't really have any money to pay for lessons. And Schnabel said, "That's okay. You can earn your keep by accompanying my wife's singing lessons." And Schnabel was married to Teresa Bear Schnabel, who was a great lieder singer. And so she learned about Schubert lieder and Schubert songs, and she told me the importance of all this. Uh, and so, even though I didn't actually study Schubert lieder with her, and I didn't study orchestral scores with her, but she opened my eyes, which were already opened by going to the LA Philharmonic concerts and so on. Uh, and so I always had kind of a broad view of things. And then later on, I started chamber music, and I was put into. There was this wonderful program in Southern California called the Young Musicians Foundation that would put chamber groups together, and have these top-notch musicians as coaches. So again, when I was, I don't know, 14 or 15 or something like that, I was playing trios, and you know, and so on. And my parents are tremendous music lovers of all music, and my mom in particular has always been an opera lover. And I caught from her, not at first, when I was young, I didn't like it, but then eventually I caught the opera bug, and now I am a huge opera uh, fanatic, whatever. uh, and so, again, I think I was fortunate enough to kind of have this broad view of things growing up. Uh, and so, by the way, I also wanted to uh, slightly touch one thing when you were introducing me. I don't consider myself really to be a scholar at all, compared to a real scholar like a Charles Rosen or a musicologist. I have very scant knowledge actually. I have knowledge of I have a broad knowledge of music itself, and I've read very some snippets of books, and I've gotten a DMA, and I've picked up a lot of stuff on the way. Uh, but also, I guess, uh, nowadays, maybe at in musical circles, sometimes when they say somebody is a scholar, that means already that maybe they play in a scholarly way, which I hope I don't do, and I don't think that you meant that when you said that. But anyway, I consider myself I love learning about music and looking at music in new ways, and from whether it's analytical or musicians. I love going to uh, rehearsals of orchestras, by great conductors. I've learned a ton of inspiration and all kinds of things. Uh, there was a time when I was living in Southern California, and the great conductor Kurt Zonderling came to Los Angeles frequently. And I have a good friend in the orchestra who was in the orchestra at the time, and he let me into the rehearsals. And I was so inspired, and I learned so much about music making from Kurt Zonderling. So that's been a huge part of my overall uh, education.
Since you were talking about Schubert, um,
Yes.
and you are going to offer a course specifically on Schubert, could you elaborate a little bit what you think about how important it is for students, particularly to understand the singing voice and the importance of singing in piano playing?
My, well, not just my teacher, Leon Fleischer, but he mentioned, that ultimately we all strive to imitate the human voice. The ultimate instrument is the human voice. And when we sing, whether we are a rank amateur with no voice like me, or whether you are one of the greatest singers ever, when you sing, that's the most direct connection to the soul. There's no instrument in the way, or this uh, complicated contraption called the keyboard and action in the way between the music and the soul. The voice is the most direct way of expression. I think we have to try to come as close as possible on the piano to give the kind of directness of expression that a singer has, the direct conveyance of emotion uh, that a singer has. Even beyond that, I mean, whether it's Mozart or Schubert or anybody else, I often tell my students that uh, if you want to know how a passage should sound, uh, actually sing it. It doesn't matter if you sing in tune, or it doesn't matter if you sing with a terrible voice, but one has to sing it with as much conviction of how you think that passage should go, with the most subtlest inflection that you possibly can do with your own voice. And then you try to really notice how it sounds when you do that. And then you go to the piano and you play that melody and you try and see how does that differ from my singing of it, like what you just did. And then you do what you can to minimize the difference. You can never get all the way there. With Schubert especially, uh, the real core of Schubert are his leaders, is his leader. Joanna Groudon, the teacher, told me in order to get to know Schubert, you have to get to know his songs. Uh, and that's going to be kind of the basis of this lecture is, composers have often one genre that they're most at home at. With Mozart, it's the opera. With Chopin, maybe it's the mazurka, you know, and so on. And with Schubert, it's the lead, and that's really the core of Schubert is in his leader. So I'm going to talk about his songs and how they relate to piano repertoire.
I would love to focus on Beethoven a bit. They
Okay.
performed Beethoven, the whole cycle, a couple of times already. First of all, I'd love to know that your experience of learning these very profound works, I mean, a span through the earliest and the latest. What does it tell you? What does it teach you about humanity, about Beethoven, about ourselves?
That's a very good question. In the case of Beethoven, I think, in a way, it's almost as if he teaches one how to live, how to become a better person. And I think, I mean, you could argue that any great art, when you experience it, it makes you a better person. But with Beethoven especially, there is a kind of ethical dimension to his music. And when one searches for the meaning of it, when one studies it and thinks about it and conveys it, I think some of this kind of comes across. And there's this kind of enlightenment, the wisdom of the belief in ethics and quality and all of that and human dignity. Uh, that really comes through in Beethoven loud and clear. And so I think that's largely what Beethoven teaches me. I mean, that's one of the things. Uh, and another thing, this is repertoire I've played and come back to and come back to. I may think for the moment that I've studied the heck out of it and I've given it my all, and I figured I've finally found everything that there is with this piece. Then I come back the next time, whatever, a month, a year later, and I realize I've missed so many things or so many dimensions. So one learns that it's never ending, and that one can always develop and learn and grow and see new light and new wisdom with this music.
How do you pass on your passion to the next generation?
I come to a lesson, I just listen, and I react to what I hear, and I say what seems to be the right thing for the student at that point. I try not to have agendas or formulas or systems or textbooks. I mean, unwritten down textbooks. Uh, I just kind of intuitively relate to the situation at the moment. I have to just listen very carefully, and if the student does something that isn't the way I do it, I have to ask myself, is it valid? And if I can possibly sanction it, if I possibly can, then I'll say, fine, that's okay. I'm not going to interfere. But then I'll try to the extent needed, talk about, get to the essence of the piece. I try to, to gear the instruction or whatever towards finding the basic essence, the kernel of truth of the piece, shall we say. I don't like to dictate, and I don't like to say you must do this way and you must do this way. And if I can make a suggestion, I try to explain why, and so on. So,
how you look at the future of piano performance, but classical in general? Any advice for the young students now trying to get into the conservatory or already in the conservatory?
Yeah, I have to say that I am perhaps foolishly idealistic in this sense. I believe that the study and pursuit of music and self-improvement in music and searching and all of that is in and of itself self-justifying, that for no other reason than that one should do it if one really loves the music enough. And one has to go with the love of music, and hopefully a teacher will make that love of music develop and blossom. But for no other, not for who knows what kind of career or what expectation, not for necessarily expecting to be winning the Clyburn or playing in Carnegie Hall, but just the activity of this beautiful activity of exploring music and developing it and realizing reaching one's potential as best one can is in and of itself worth doing. Now, as far as the future of music as a whole is, I really don't know, because I hear such gloom and doom. Classical music is dying, and it's the same old guys that were recycling over and over. And there is so much new music being written, and I'm sort of at fault that I'm not as well versed in new music as I ought to be. But I'd like to think that the great masterpieces will never die, and that there is always room for people to find their way with and to project some aspect of. Also, I'm thinking that maybe, like, for example, this long cultural drought of COVID will result in a reverse reaction where people will be starving for great music and will go to concerts more and more and more as restrictions are lifted. So maybe in that sense, the future of music is bright. It's also a matter of exposure, and people don't get exposed to classical music enough. I recently saw on YouTube uh, just a little anecdote. I think it was like a great, or maybe great, or I don't know, granddaughter of Gustav Mahler, and was talking with this sort of lawyer slash conductor Gilbert Kaplan, who went around conducting Mahler's Second Symphony, and anyway, told the story that Gilbert Kaplan was flying on an airplane once and was listening to some Mahler on the headphones, and the person next to him was a teenage girl who was a punk rock, with the hair and the color and everything. He was listening uh, the punk rock music, and turned to him and said, "Hey, what band are you listening to?" And Gilbert Kaplan didn't say anything. He just took his headphones and put it on her ears, and said that within a few minutes she was crying her head off. She was absolutely overwhelmed by Mahler's music, you know. And so a story like that tells me, that maybe there is hope for classical music. That if people really, there will be people, not everybody, but there will be people who don't think they're open to it, but when they're exposed to it, wow, to assume that there is hope